Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. So, Mario Kart World's retro tracks are interesting to say the least. Some of them only slightly change parts of the original tracks. Others got complete makeovers to the point of being unrecognizable, both for good and bad, and others are virtually unchanged. I don't think there's quite any other Mario Kart entry where the retro selection of the game is quite as divisive as here. One minute you'll hear how much people love this new version of Dino Dino Jungle, and another you'll hear why Choco Mountain or Desert Hills killed their grandma. Sometimes the tracks are filled with hazards and difficult tech to pull off, but other courses are just walks in the park. It's kind of interesting to see how one game can have such a mixed range of quality for its retro tracks. Most people will agree that Mario Kart DS's classic selection was underwhelming due to the weak hardware and abundance of circuit tracks, or that Mario Kart 8's retro tracks were stellar because of their graphical overhaul. Meanwhile, the only thing Mario Kart World's retro tracks have in common is that they have no similarities, except for being connected through an open world. Otherwise, the ideas and philosophy behind their changes have virtually no similarities. In fact, most people can't even universally seem to agree which takes on tracks are the best or not. And that is why today I wanted to chime in on this discussion as well, and talk about how good I think each retro track is as a remake. Not as courses by themselves, but rather how much I feel they do their original tracks justice. Remember, a retro track that happens to be great is not always necessarily better than the original, if for example it completely abandons the core of what made the original stand out. So for this video I'm gonna be ranking the retro tracks on a tier list, based off of how their quality compares to their OG counterparts. D for downgrade, C for comparable, B for better, A for ahead, and finally S for spotless improvements. However, I'm not gonna be including Mario's circuit for this video, so I'll just talk about that now instead. As a course, it's pretty good. I like that it combines 3 of the SNES Mario circuit tracks to make for a more interesting and varied race throughout all 3 laps. But also, it's not really an improvement on one track as much as it's on 3 tracks collectively. So like, on what merits would you rank this? Individually, Mario Circuit 1 and 3 are virtually unchanged from the original counterparts, aside from the added half-pipe surrounding them that are useless, and Mario Circuit 2 is marginally worse than the 7 version due to the removed glider and trampoline. Does that mean the track as a whole is technically a downgrade? Do you see why this analogy doesn't work for this track? It might as well just be a nitro for the sake of this video. But yeah, with all of that being said, let's first rank the 8 improved tracks in my opinion, and then the 5 downgraded courses. And also keep in mind that some of my feelings for these tracks have slightly changed since when I made the initial ranking back in June, so if anything seems off, yeah, that's why. So with all of that said, let's begin. To start off, we have DK Pass opening up the best list. This is a track that I initially didn't really have any expectations for at all, and when you look at the surface level changes brought to it, it's kind of easy to see why. The original track was good enough, it was a soothing little track around an untouched snowy mountain, but it was definitely pretty unmemorable in the grand scheme, without any mind-blowing gimmicks. Or well, aside from that item box that gave you stars or triple mushrooms. And at a first glance, this remake does commit several flaws. Whether it's removing the snowman at the end for some reason, which were a nice hazard, or turning the whole track into a bit of a ski resort, making it lose some of its initial charm and atmosphere. Even that item box it brought up is gone. However, the more I play it, the more I realize it's a perfect example of a track where the mechanics of Mario Kart World do so much to make for a more iconic experience. There's plenty of new set pieces you can trick off from, whether it's this lamppost or these trees in the forest, and that's not to mention the added areas you can rail grind now on. Perhaps the coolest new shortcut in this track, which I had no idea about until a few weeks ago, involves you driving into the wall here at the start, in order to just climb it up and skip an entire turn. It's genuinely kind of insane, and not even that hard to pull off. And all of this brings a new perspective to DK Pass that I never would have considered in the original. However, it's still at the bottom of the good list because the general quality of it is still pretty on par with the original. For all the fun Mario Kart World's parkour gimmicks bring, it still feels a bit souring that they took out the rather desolate and calm atmosphere, in favor of turning it into DK Snowboard Cross Light. The fact that there's plenty of removed elements in this remake makes it all eventually even out to a pretty comparable remake overall. It was a just good course back then, and it's still just good enough. On to a more drastically changed track though, Desert Hills is right next up.
Dude, this is literally the worst changed course of all time. Have you gone mad, Albert?
Dude, you don't even like this track to begin with. But yeah, so this is perhaps one of the more notorious remakes to come out of this game, and on the one hand, I can see why. They took what was already considered to be a bland and boring desert track and removed virtually all the hazards it had, in addition to toning down the elevation. Gone are the Super Mario Bros. Free references, as well as the insanely broken shortcuts that made it stand out. I should especially be pissed because I actually kinda like the original track because of those. But actually, while it may seem bad at first, I found what each section replaced in this new version to be marginally more engaging in execution. The pyramid shortcut was cool, but now you can do a shroomless cut on the starting turn, plus you got the funny looking Toko Tokos running around here, with more and more coming each lap. And the open area in the original was absolutely boring, only having a couple of pokies and untrickable hills. Now it instead has a bunch of sand dunes for you to chain tricks on though, which is far more satisfying, plus the new Batodon enemies, while easy to avoid, are a far more unique addition. And while for the ending, you may not have these giant hills you can cut through now, instead you've got like 5 different split paths you can pick from. You can go through normally, take a ramp, a glider, or you can take one of these 2 grind rails, or cut through the finish line in water. Is it sad that we lost the dramatic mushroom shortcuts of the original? Yeah, I won't deny that, but when this version has more options than that one ever had, and without having to use a mushroom to experience them, mind you, I don't feel so bad about them being sacrificed. That's not to say this remake isn't still a bit empty. It would have been nice if we could have at least had some fire snakes scattered around, and I do suppose the fact that they completely changed the aesthetic from Mario 3 to Mario Land is a somewhat disrespectful choice, but also funny Easter Island heads go brr. Still, I suppose the remake is a bit disrespectful to the original track's legacy, so while I do think this course is a genuine improvement, because of that reason and the emptiness, it's still gonna stay near the bottom of the better tier. Another rather controversial remake, which I believe got drastically improved, would be Choco Mountain. This one I was initially pretty hesitant with at first glance, back when it was first revealed in April, since out of all the retro tracks, I'd argue this one probably feels the most extremely different from the original. Because instead of driving around a desolate but joyful chocolate mountain trail, which looked absolutely delicious, not only are you much closer to the ground here, not only does half the mountain look too hard to be edible, but the whole atmosphere has also been changed for the more chaotic, as a Charge and Chuck syndicate has decided to industrialize the place. On one hand, like with Desert Hills, it's not too terribly faithful, hence why it's on the lower end of the list, but on another hand, holy crap, this is one of my favorite courses in the game now. I liked Choco Mountain well enough before this as well, particularly the Booster Course Pass remake for the added cave and glider, but aside from the aesthetics, which were definitely more appealing back then, literally every change here just makes for a much more interesting ride on the whole. The Charge and Chucks running across the road and tossing hand eggs add much needed hazard variety, which wasn't really there to begin with, and on top of that, the rolling rocks actually feel like hazards as well finally, since they'll actually roll onto the track, instead of just bouncing right off. And there's just so many new off-road cuts you can breeze through, not to mention added split paths making use of the game's new tech, that makes it so much more engaging than it ever was before. And that's not to mention the absolutely badass new remix as well. It's probably my favorite song overall to come from this game, barring Cheap Cheap Falls only. I don't miss the original version of Choco Mountain at all, and considering it was already one of the most remade tracks in the series up until this point, changing it up this dramatically was honestly warranted if it had to come back again. I still feel hesitant about putting it in a higher slot than the B tier, since it does take a lot of liberties, but hey, there's still plenty of chocolate in the form of lakes here anyways, and I wouldn't say it quite betrays the original's identity. That's something I could say for Desert Hills, for example. Okay, so a lot of people are definitely not going to agree with me on this one anymore. It's been dunked on to death in several Mario Kart rankings, but while it certainly has fallen off a fair bit for me, Peach Beach is just one of those remakes which, while it certainly has an inconsistency to it, the idea behind it just puts such a smile on my face. Like yeah, on a surface level, it does seem kinda since the proper Peach Beach area that we're familiar with from past games has been absolutely nerfed. Like, the original track wasn't mind-blowing, but it was fun enough for being an oval, with plenty of branching pathways and fun tides to avoid or cut through with mushrooms. But in a game where you can just drive over the water, what's the point? Like, these water scooters are not gonna make up for it, nor is the removal of all the cataquacks after the halfway point. If this is all we had for 3 laps straight, this would easily be the worst remake bar none. But fortunately, that's not why they brought the track back. Instead, it was so they could give it a whole new expansion you drive through for the last 2 laps. And admittedly, they're not the greatest things ever. They're effectively glorified straightaways, where the technically fastest path is to just drive normally through, but come on. let's not be that boring about it. Yes, alternating between the many branching pathways, jumping across the buildings, rooftops, and between the castle walls may be slower on paper, but I would also be lying if I didn't say it's so much crazy fun, to the point that I'll always choose that. Do I wish those paths were faster? Yeah, no doubt, but at the same time, I don't think it's the end of the world, since winning isn't everything. And besides, a path being slower also means less people will take them, steering you away from item chaos potentially. So it could all eventually work out in the end anyways. However, above all, having all 3 laps be different just gives the track a much more different and organic progression, feeling more like an adventure where you treasure every moment. By itself, lap 1 would be boring as crap, but when it merely serves as a warm-up for the main show, it's a little more endearing. And while I won't deny that the very last stretch of lap 3 is a little boring as well, and might go on for a little too long, it also works fine enough to wind down the journey before the end, considering just how chaotic the middle chunk is. On the whole, it's such a unique take on a retro track, and while it is unrecognizable, similar to Desert Hills and Chaco Mountain, I also feel that this one is still a little more faithful to the source material. It has some worse changes, but the track itself still has the same general vibe as the original, and most of the additions feel pretty organically implemented. Like, I could totally see this town area having been here the whole time, even if we never ventured there before. It's a nice evolution on what was otherwise a fairly simple track. So overall, I think this is a confidently better track as well, despite the on paper horrible downgrades. Now, Toad's Factory, on the other hand, is pretty much the opposite from the previous 3 tracks we just talked about, as it effectively stays almost identical to the original with only a few additions sprinkled throughout, which definitely benefited it in the long run. I say almost the same because they removed the crates and replaced them with coins on some of the conveyor belts, but otherwise this is by far the most authentic of the game's retro tracks by a landslide, excluding Moo Meadows. It's got the same core layout, same road hazards, elements, virtually nothing was taken out. On the contrary though, there were tons of new additions in the form of branching paths you could take, reachable through the game's new parkour mechanics, which added yet another layer to this already immensely chaotic track. Oh wait, did I say chaotic? I'm sorry, I meant complete anarchy. Because did I also mention that they scaled down the whole track? And in a game with 24 players as well. In most cases, I would not be too happy about this, but because this is already a track based around such a frantic setting, it feels right at home, and I'd argue that because of this, replacing the crates with coins was honestly the best call. So effectively, this remake is almost superior in every way. However, the reason it's not any higher and only number 4 is because, well, the original Mario Kart Wii track was frankly already amazing as it was, so the improvement isn't that drastic. I mean, there is a reason this was a requested fan favorite after all. And for what it's worth, if there is something I personally felt was missing here, it was that grungy atmosphere. Like, I don't know, Toad's Factory in Mario Kart Wii just felt larger in scope and more dangerous, with more visible machinery, and all of it put into perspective how lethal this was as a working place. Meanwhile, this feels like the Cocomelon version of it, looking more like just a bright toy factory, which is still charming. Okay, maybe the Cocomelon comparison was a bit too much hyperbole, but yeah, in the world of remakes, while this is a great one, it's not necessarily one that wows me. However, it doesn't have any substantial flaws, and for what it's worth, I think it's safe to say that it's at least quite ahead of the original version. So our first A-tier remake. Oh yeah, they cooked with N64 Wario Stadium. Or well, except for the walls. What kind of asshole took out Wario's face plastered across it? I guess modern gaming really does have no soul. Okay, but seriously, I think this is probably the track that has grown on me the most overall from when I first made my ranking of the game. Either this or Bowser Castle, both of them I severely underrated. I thought it was cool enough that they finally brought back the track after 30 years, but beyond that, I didn't really think about it too much, as it pretty much just felt like any other dirt bike stadium. Oh my, was I so unbelievably wrong. There's so much hidden tech and branching paths in just about every corner of this track, most of which I had no idea about until I started exploring it more myself. There's so many walls everywhere you can jump up and ride along, so many ramps scattered everywhere to help you reach them, to the point that the whole track almost feels like the perfect showcase of just how versatile Mario Kart World's gameplay can get. Some will even say it's the best remake of a track ever, bar none, and that's completely understandable. I myself, however, am a little more close-minded. Look, I'm not gonna pretend the original course was some sort of masterpiece or anything. I liked it a bit, I thought it was a moderately charming endurance test with all its different types of ramps, but I also won't deny that it was pretty generic, and went on for way too long. And the fact that this was also before tricks were even introduced did cause the track to be more boring than it should have been. By all means, this remake is more fun in just about every way. However, it's also not really N64 Wario Stadium anymore, and not even because of the walls. I mean, just look at the layout, they took out like half the track. And I get it was to reduce the insane length, but couldn't that also have just been accomplished by making it a 2-lap track? Remember, this video is not just about what retro tracks are the most fun courses, it's also about how they are as remakes. And while this remake is infinitely more fun, I also don't think it quite deserves to be number 1, when the top 2 managed to also make way better changes without completely changing the core layout. And I mean, imagine how much cooler this track could have been if it retained its layout. We could have had even more walls to ride and whatnot, maybe even more different types of ramps. But yeah, don't take this too much the wrong way. On a quality basis, which is the most important part, I would easily much rather play this than the original one, since it went from mediocre to one of my favorite tracks of all time. It just could have been even more epic. And besides... the top 2 remakes happen to be complete and spotless masterpieces in every way. Literally every change brought to these tracks not only make for much more engaging experiences, but they also don't sacrifice anything either to make room for it. And Shy Guy Bazaar is perhaps the gold standard for how to improve an already great track. Like, this makes Toad's Factory look shallow in terms of the new paths added. Shy Guy Bazaar is so technical that you could theoretically go an entire lap without as much as touching the ground, aside from at the very end and starting line bit. Just like in Wario Stadium, pretty much everywhere there are at least 2 or 3 different paths to take, arguably even more so here actually. Maybe a bit too many. Nah, who am I kidding? My biggest problem with the original was that the second half of the track was kinda empty, after how much more packed the Bazaar area was, but that's been addressed to hell and beyond. And in general, I love how much they took advantage of this track's already tightly packed town setting to craft one of the most mechanically stimulating courses of all time. Hell, it's my favorite track from the game personally after much evaluation. I don't know why that wasn't immediately obvious to me from the get-go. The most that this remake technically sacrifices, I guess, is the permanent night aesthetic, but while that certainly was charming as all can be in the original, daytime and especially sunset work fine enough here as well, in part thanks to the slightly more exciting remix. And I mean, hey, there is still a night theme anyways. So yeah, this remake is perfect, no complaints. It honestly could have been number 1, because as it also turns out, there's even a second variant for the track where you go through Daisy's Palace, adding even more dimension to this area. However, because you can't play it normally, it's only available if you play the intermission leading from Airship Fortress to Wario Stadium, I'm also not gonna put too much weight on it for this video. Maybe if it was attached as a further lap route for the track, I could have considered it, but for now, I'm just counting Shy Guy Bazaar as it is in versus mode. And as such, I don't think it's quite the most improved retro track. Never mind, the original was still pretty great. So instead, that honor will have to go to... without a doubt, Sky High Sundae. Can you honest to god name any other retro remake which not only fixes quite literally everything about it, while also staying pretty much entirely faithful to what the initial idea the original set out to do? I don't think so. Like, praise Wario Stadium all you want, but it also kind of fundamentally missed the point of the original, being this long marathon. Sky High Sundae in Mario Kart World though takes the janky-ass oval from Tor in the Booster Course Pass, with its migraine-inducing visuals, glitched out rails and weird-ass physics, and actually makes it really engaging. Even as someone who thought the 8 Deluxe version was barely acceptable at first, this new take is honest to god making me reconsider how much I really even liked that one to begin with. It was just so rushed and cheap, even if I still like the athletic and cheerful vibe of it and focus on split paths. But well, not only does this version still keep that jolly atmosphere, but literally the whole place has been spammed with grind rails, walls to ride, and branching pathways everywhere. They took a literal oval and made it one of the best tracks in the game, and that's not even an insult to the rest of the track selection. Honestly, to a lesser extent, I feel like this track doesn't even deserve to be in this video to begin with. I fully buy into the conspiracy that this was initially a Mario Kart World nitro that we simply just got a beta sneak peek for in the Booster Course Pass, since we do know Mario Kart World was in development since at least 2017, and the fact that the railings actually have a gameplay purpose here only makes that feel more like the case. but at the same time, screw it. Just for the sake of this video and the fact that it now technically still is a retro track anyways, I mean even the goddamn game considers it to be one, I'm gonna include it either way. And from that lens, this is easily the best changed course in the entirety of Mario Kart World. No contest. But that's enough about the tracks that changed for the better. Now it is time to venture deep within the downward spiral though, and talk about the 5 retro tracks that changed for the worse.
Wait, you forgot to talk about the...
To be honest, the more time passes, the more I am unsure about how I should truly feel about Moo Moo Meadows in Mario Kart World. Like sure, when you put it next to the Mario Kart Wii original, there's no doubt which version is more magical and developed. But I'm not comparing it with that. I'm comparing it to the Mario Kart 8 version, which was the latest remake up until this point. And when you put these two next to each other, it becomes quite a bit closer of a match. There are certainly things the Mario Kart World version does better. Being able to jump up and bounce from the cows, ride along the fences, and trick off of every tiny bump in the road is certainly a lot of fun. It almost makes up for the fact that they removed that to ramp over the big open area at the end. But at the same time, I don't know, the Mario Kart 8 version also just looked a lot better. Having a more desaturated color scheme, more realistic art style, and a permanent sunset just gave it a more beautiful, bittersweet, and almost nostalgic atmosphere. By contrast, the Mario Kart World version may be more vibrant in its color palette, but the more cartoony look just doesn't feel as immersive, and while the added parkour elements are nice, I don't think Moo Moo Meadows is the kind of track that rides or dies based on if it has that or not. For me, it was always a track lifted by the vibes first and foremost, and while the World version still has quite a bit of that, the remix is still almost as beautiful as it was in 8, and at least during sunrise it is pretty gorgeous, but on the whole, yeah, I still think I'd rather play the Wii U remake by a tiny smidge. They're pretty comparable all things considered, and they're both still absolutely beautiful tracks, but this version definitely lost a bit of its specialness. Alright, before I talk about this next track, I feel like I have to clear something up in case it's not obvious already, but a retro track being worse than its previous incarnations does not mean it's bad. Moo Moo Meadows was worse here than it was in 8, but it's still a damn good track. And likewise, Dino Dino Jungle is still pretty damn epic and probably one of the game's top 10. Look, I love Jurassic Park and all, but I don't love it so much it can entirely swoon me over. And for every step this remake takes forward, it also takes 2 back. There are good changes made to it. I like the added new path you can take in the renovated cave section, and it's cool that there are more types of dinosaurs roaming around, living up to the course's namesake, and I guess it's charming that the cave had an entire laboratory installed within itself. It is absolutely a charming and dynamic track still, but at the same time I don't think the amount of dinosaurs is what made the original track stand out for me. It was the grueling difficulty as well as the adventurous feeling of going through an abandoned prehistoric jungle. And no, don't say it was only harder because of Double Dash's controls. Yeah, the Mario Kart 7 version was easier, but it was still by no means an easy track, with all the geysers, lack of guard railings, and a Noshi with his fat stomping legs blocking the path. And they just completely took that challenge out from here. The geysers are trickable now, the new dinosaurs are slim and don't even properly block the path, and the bridge has guardrails for some reason. Heck, the middle bridge, which was always especially tough to stay on because of the boost panels, has now also been turned into a short automated grind rail. And all just so we can have more dinosaurs. And honestly, while the laboratory dome is charming, I can't say it's more exciting than the abandoned cave ruins originally. And on the whole, the vibe of this track just isn't nearly as adventurous anymore. So yeah, this is a great and interesting track still, however, it is not a great Dino Dino Jungle, and it's definitely not as engaging to play either. I still love playing it, and when it comes down to the quality, the amount of enjoyment I harvest from it is still generally very comparable to the original, but yeah, we're definitely treading on enemy territory. You know, Koopa Beach 2 in Super Mario Kart was a pretty good track, all things considered, at least when you consider the SNES's standards. It may have just been a short circle where you go left the whole time, but not only was it gentle on the controls of the game, resulting in a less frustrating than usual experience, but there was also a cool enough section where you had to avoid the deep pits of water to get through it. So can someone tell me what is the point of its existence in a game where you can just ski over water? What compelled the developers to bring this freaking circle back for this game? They could have brought back the N64 Koopa Beach track or combined it with the first SNES Koopa Beach, but nope, it's just Koopa Beach 2, renamed to make it sound greater than it is. Ugh. but I guess it's not completely unplayably bad. I mean, as a remake, it's disrespectful as heck. Literally the only improvement I guess it has are the visuals and the rave remix. But I guess this track is at least a little chaotic and fun. Maybe Sir Musty just got through me, but adding the 5 laps thrown into the mix and the fact that there's 24 players on the track at all times, there is admittedly some charm to the track, as it almost feels like a slightly bigger version of Baby Park. And when you look at it through that lens, it can be a so chaotic and simple track, but it loops back to being fun with friends. But only with friends. In single player, it's still shit. When all is said and done, it's not the remake that infuriates me the most, and I mean, it's not like most of Super Mario Kart tracks were particularly good anyways. If anything, this one was just acceptable back then, and now it's boring, but also a little exciting. So hitting on this track feels a bit like yelling at a cloud for changing its formation slightly. It is a downgrade, just not that massive of a one, but at the same time, holy crap, they should have just brought back Baby Park instead, honestly. The real deal would have just been far more fun. This one still feels a bit too big to properly replicate that track's feelings. Airship Fortress, man, oh my god. Now, I've made my indifference of this track quite clear for a while on my channel. I think it's a way too fast-paced and short-feeling course where all of the sections go by too quickly without leaving much of a mark. However, for as much as I think Airship Fortress is overrated, one thing that it was not was bland. The eerie purple skies, the ominous and petrifying soundtrack, if there's one thing this track absolutely excelled at, it was no doubt the atmosphere. The atmosphere in particular, which has been almost completely sucked out of the Mario Kart World version. The only purple skies here occur during the rare 2-lap long sunrise time. Otherwise, you're stuck with generic night, or a day so bright it feels like a circus now. And that's as if the remix also wasn't so unnecessarily chaotic here as well now.
So, what? You only hate this remake just because it feels different? It's not your scrimbly pimbly anymore?
I wish that was the extent of my disappointment. But no, somehow the gameplay differences disappointed me even more. The most harmless change of which are the added grind rails. They are completely underwhelming at worst and at best just pointless. They take virtually no skill to use, since you can just hop on one right after dropping from the starting line, make a jump right when it curves, and suddenly you've just breezed through half the track without as much as breaking a sweat or interacting with the course's hazards. You know, the things that barely get time to shine to begin with, and as if this track didn't feel too short already. You know, the reason branching grind rail paths are so fun in other tracks is that they usually take a lot of skill to pull off, which makes up in the satisfaction for missing any other intended track elements. However, because the grind rails are also so easy to navigate here, that also means that everyone will do it, leading to you most likely getting pushed off anyways. So, thanks for nothing at all? I wouldn't even say it's risk versus reward, because the reward is more boring than just going through normal anyways. It's just boring and short-paced whichever path you take. However, the worst changed bit is that final narrow spiral at the end. Dear god, this did not turn out well at all with 24 players. Originally, it was just kinda boring, but it was a fine way to wind down the track. But cramming 24 players in there, all with their own crazy items, and it completely kills any progress you might have made. And at the very end as well. I'm all in for the chaos of Mario Kart World, but in this case particularly, it's just obnoxious. Just dump it all out. There is just one other retro track that made an even bigger downgrade. Wario's Galleon. Do you want to know how much your Galleon is worth?
It's Wario Shipyard.
Shut the f up. But yeah, I don't really think there was much of a contest on what was the game's worst changed retro track. Not the worst retro track to play per se, but the most disappointing one. Just like with some of the other tracks we've talked about, like Choco Mountain and Peach Beach, this is another drastic makeover remake in that it's virtually unrecognizable in many areas. However, unlike with those two tracks, whose changes ended up greatly benefiting and modernizing them, I don't think there's a single new thing the remake of Wario's Galleon does that is distinctly better here. Aside from some of the new parkour split paths, those are fine. But yeah, forget Airship Fortress, that one may be disappointing, but at least it still feels like Airship Fortress, just with far less soul. The whole point of Wario's Galleon was that you drove through a submerged underwater shipwreck, which, you know, is something Mario Kart World can't translate because there's no underwater driving here. So instead, the water level had to be sunk down to make for an overwater track, and even then, some sections still ended up removed because there was no way to properly translate them above water. But hey, you know, maybe it's still fun to just drive on the water here. Right? It's not fun. The controls are floaty and slippery, which feels awkward with this track's tight turns, and while tricking off of waves is satisfying on paper, whatever the game personally considers to be a wave is a lot more cryptic than it should be. So a lot of the time, I just end up hopping like an idiot when I think I'll trick. For some people, I'm aware that this has gotten easier to do, and as such, it's not as controversial of a remake as it used to be as a result, but for me, I've just always found it awkward to pull off, resulting in a disappointing retro track even 6 months later. It may be a proficiency deficiency on my part, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel nearly as good as the original. Even aesthetically, they took out the heart and soul of the track, it feels like at times. Gone is the purple and yellow color scheme and all of the Wario related references, while aside from above the tunnel at the start, and the color palette is a lot more grey and drab. Which, it looks cool and haunting enough still, but it feels much less like a Wario track. Forget Wario's face not being plastered in the stadium, this is a far bigger loss. At the same time though, unlike the last 2 retro tracks we just talked about, I don't feel nearly as angry about this one, if angry at all. Because even though in execution, it did end up being the worst changed retro track from the original, since Mario Kart 7's version is for me probably one of the best tracks from that game, the changes here also don't really feel as bad on paper, as much as they were probably just meant to be a way to give the track a unique spin. And while it did end up frustrating, I respect the effort enough. Whereas the changes made to Koopa Troopa Beach and Airship Fortress are bad even in concept. And for what it's worth, I still enjoy the atmosphere and the tech tied to this track enough, to the point that it can be an alright time. I don't hate playing the track, heck, I don't dislike any of the retro tracks at all, except probably Koopa Beach 2. But yeah, on the whole, when all is said and done, I still think this was easily the biggest miss of the retros compared to their previous versions. And I think this would have been better off in the booster course pass. And with that, I think that should just about conclude my full thoughts and opinions on what the best and worst changed retro tracks were for Mario Kart World. This is definitely not controversial and won't start any wars.
Dude, you're just completely wrong about everything here. How can you honestly say that Desert Hills and Peach Beach had better remakes than Airship Fortress and Dino Dino Jungle? This is why everyone thinks you're a rage baiter.
I know. I am fully aware that my opinions on these retros are probably going to be wildly different from what the majority of people think, but that's also why I'm happy to announce that these are just my opinions. They're not a constitutional amendment yet. Let me know down in the comments what you think are the best and worst changed remakes of the game. In either case, I hope you all enjoyed hearing my perspective on them, and if you liked the video, then make sure to subscribe for even more Mario content and join my Discord server, Greenpipe City, for even more updates. And with all that being said, I'm signing off now. Until next time.